Afternoon. We'll be starting here in a few moments, so if you could find your seat, and we'll get started. Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome you all to the Gold Star Hall ceremony. My name is Chad Garland, and I am the director of the Memorial Union. At this time, I'd like to ask you to please silence all cell phones and electronic devices for the duration of the ceremony. If you are able, please rise for the presentation of the colors by the ROTC Tri-Service Color Guard and our national anthem sung by the ROTC Air Force Cadet Choir.
Say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
You may be seated. In 1928, the doors of the Memorial Union opened to a living memorial for those who selflessly protect the freedoms of our country. The Gold Star Hall ceremony is our opportunity to celebrate the lives of the men and women who paid the ultimate sacrifice for our freedom. Today, we come together to hear the story of 3 Iowa State students who answered the call to serve our country and remembered the impact of these incredible members of the Iowa State family. A tradition within the military that builds a sense of belonging is to present a coin, which signifies a person's connection to an organization. Iowa State University has designed a coin to honor this tradition and to help foster new connections. On one side of our coin is the gold star and the words which are engraved in Gold Star Hall, "For thee they died," reminding us of the sacrifice of those who have gone before us. The other side reads Iowa State University, and the motto, sorry, I lost my place for a second. And the motto, "Learning to return services to those who served us." We'll have a coin available for viewing in the Oak Room following the ceremony. After the narratives about each of our honorees, the Assistant Director of the Military Affiliated Students Center, Anthony Thacker, will give each family a coin to keep. It is meant to demonstrate our commitment and to serve as a reminder that these honorees are always a part of us, and we will continue to remember and respect each person whose name is inscribed on the walls of the Gold Star Hall. Dr. Wendy Winterstein became the 16th president of Iowa State University in 2017. She is the first woman and only second ISU graduate to hold the university's highest office. For more than 40 years, Dr. Winterstein has served Iowa State in several capacities, from Extension and Outreach Associate to the first endowed Dean of the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences. In her 8th year as president, she is advancing Iowa State as one of the most student-centric leading research universities in the country, where all students, faculty, and staff can flourish. Please join me in welcoming President Wendy Winterstein.
Thank you, Chad. Well, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here with you and to share my welcome to the Gold Star ceremony. The event is an annual opportunity for reflection and reverence for the service and sacrifice made by our fellow Iowa Staters. It is a time to share our deep gratitude to our veterans and current members of the armed forces, and to recognize the family and friends who provide love and support. Gold Star Hall stands as a living memorial to nearly 600 Iowa Staters who died serving in World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Somalia, and the global war on terrorism. We are deeply indebted to all those who have answered the call to serve. Today, we honor 3 Cyclones for their military service and for making the ultimate sacrifice to defend our freedom. Air Force Second Lieutenant Max Harvey Collins, Air Force Captain James Wayne Herrick, Jr., and Army First Lieutenant Sidney Peterson. You will soon hear the stories of these men, of their time here on campus, and of their military service. Not unlike the students of today, these men worked hard in the classroom. They were involved in campus organizations, and they believed in the importance of public service. These young men and all the individuals whose names are etched in the Gold Star Hall deserve our respect and appreciation. We offer our deepest sympathies to the family and friends of these service members, and we take heart in knowing that their Cyclone spirit lives on in the walls of the Memorial Union. As you pass through the Gold Star Hall, I encourage you to look up to the 12 stained glass windows Each window depicts a virtue that represents what it means to be an Iowa Stater. They include learning, courage, faith, determination, love, loyalty, and integrity. I asked all members of the Iowa State community to join me in paying tribute to the men and women who have made the ultimate sacrifice by living these virtues every day. Thank you for helping us honor these service members and for being part of this very special ceremony. Thank you.
Next, we'll hear from Lieutenant Colonel Frank Spurl of the United States Army and Chair and Professor of Military Science of Iowa State's Army ROTC program.
Thank you, Chad, for the introduction. And thank you, President Winterstein, for your remarks, for your time, and the example you set. Robert Reigener, Mayor Hala, thank you for joining us. I'd like to extend a special welcome to the friends and family of Sidney Peterson, Max Collins, and James Wayne Herrick, Jr. Your presence here speaks to the love and pride that endures for these three who gave everything. I was not born or raised in Iowa, but the opportunity to speak here with you as part of this community is both an honor and a privilege to me. Thank you. In May, Americans came together in gatherings both large and small, wearing poppies to commemorate over 1 million fellow Americans who made the ultimate sacrifice. On the 11th day of the 11th month, just 2 days ago, Americans raised the flag in thanks to the 16 million living veterans of our armed services. Today, we gather here in this company to mark the service of over 6,000 Iowa Staters and the final service of nearly 600 since the onset of the Great War. We give ear to the lives of 3 men, 3 pilots from 3 different wars, whose names are now engraved on the walls of our Gold Star Hall. 96 years later, this hall stands loyal, forever true. It does not stand alone. It takes a dedicated group of students, event staff, and community volunteers to find and research the stories of those whose names deserve remembrance. Thank you, Megan Moore, Lana Seiler, Dave Kirchel, midshipmen of the Navy Color Guard, and all who contribute their time and effort. Your dedication to this hall and this event bring the names memorialized in limestone to life. You make the simple act of entering this building welcoming and an enlightening experience. On behalf of fellow veterans, I am humbled and inspired by your example and wish you the utmost of gratitude. As we transition to the stories of Lieutenant Peterson, Lieutenant Collins, and Captain Herrick, join us in remembering their service, showing gratitude for their sacrifice, and sharing this knowledge to benefit Iowa, the nation, and the world. Next, I'd like to invite Brandon Culwell to speak. Brandon is a U.S. Navy veteran and an Iowa State senior with a major in aerospace engineering. Brandon.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here with us. My name is Brandon Colwell. I served as a nuclear machinist mate 2nd class for the U.S. Navy, spending 7 years in service, with my last 4 being aboard the USS Carl Vinson. My path to the Navy wasn't direct. Initially, I was here for 2 years as a student in aerospace engineering. I was a part of the Air Force ROTC. Unfortunately, I struggled academically. Fortunately for me, my grandfather, who was a retired naval flight officer and saw the potential in me and was my personal role model, saw fit to make sure that I joined up and followed his footsteps. And so I left the university and joined the Naval Nuclear Power Program. Serving as a nuclear operator for those 7 years was undoubtedly some of the most challenging experiences I've ever had, but also some of the most rewarding. They shaped me in ways I could never imagine, providing invaluable experience and insight. When I returned to Iowa State in January of 23, I found myself disconnected from the campus community. The age gap between myself and my fellow students made it difficult to reintegrate socially as well as academically for a time. However, I found my footing with the military-affiliated student center, and it became a vital support network not only that welcomed me back to academic life, but also provided a sense of belonging here in the community. Today, I have the privilege of working as a peer advisor for the Military Affiliated Student Center, helping my fellow veterans transition from military life to college life, just as others helped me. Every day on campus, I walk through Gold Star Hall. Over the years, I've noticed new names added to its memorial, each one a solemn reminder of the sacrifice paid. For many veteran students like myself, the hall holds profound significance. We treat it as hallowed ground, removing our covers as a sign of respect every time we pass through. It's not just a memorial, but a way for us to honor comrades that we've also lost in our time of service. Gold Star Hall serves as more than a tribute. It stands as a living reminder of those who have served, those who currently serve, and those who will serve. It offers the broader campus community a glimpse into the cost of service, ensuring that the legacy of those who gave everything in defense of our country and community is never forgotten. Thank you.
Today, we'll share, Today we will share remembrances of 3 Iowa State students who gave their lives for this country. Retired Army Lieutenant Colonel Jeremy Paul will speak about Army First Lieutenant Sidney Peterson. Marine Corps Sergeant Jeremy Jacobson will speak about Air Force Second Lieutenant Max Harvey Collins. And finally, retired Marine Corps Lieutenant Colonel Daniel P. Devine will speak about Air Force Captain James Herrick, Jr.
Good afternoon. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Jeremy Paul, retired, and current Director of Transportation here at Iowa State University. Thank you so much for joining us today with this wonderful ceremony. I've been part of it for the last 6 or 7 years or so, and I was ecstatic when I was asked to return to speak again this year. And I was very excited, and I am very excited to share the story of Sidney Peterson with you all today. In Rinstead, Iowa, on 30 November 1919, in the 10th year of Joseph and Martita Peterson's marriage, they became the parents of their 4th son and 5th child, Sidney Wilson Peterson. He joined older brothers James and George and his older sister Ina. But he wasn't the youngest child for long. Soon he became a doting older brother to his younger sister Mildred. Sid was steeped in his Danish heritage. His mother was born there, and his father was also of Danish ancestry. As a child, Sid was known for his continual love and kindness he showed his family members. At one moment during his childhood, he gave his grandmother a bear hug so hard that he cracked her ribs. From then on, she would remark, "Every time I breathe and my ribs hurt, I remember how good it felt to be hugged by him." In another childhood episode, he had a near-death experience with what was thought to be a rattlesnake. He was sitting next to a grate on the floor playing. His grandmother looked over and saw a rattlesnake peeking through the grate and immediately called on her husband to grab Sidney and dispose of the snake. Sid attended Ringstead High School before moving to Chicago to spend time with his mother and his brother. both of whom had moved to Illinois to pursue a better paying job and other opportunities. Sid's father had been a banker in Ringstead, but the bank failed during the Great Depression. As Sidney grew older, he decided to follow in the footsteps of his older brothers. His oldest brother, James, had moved to Chicago as a young man to work in the steel mills. Sid saw this as an opportunity and decided to follow James to the Windy City, where he also got a job in the steel mills, working with his brother. After work, the two men were known to practice boxing together at a local boxing gym run by the famous Johnny Calhoun. In the late 1930s, Sid left Chicago to pursue higher education. During the 1937-38 school year, he was enrolled at Iowa State University. There, Sid found a passion in the natural world, deciding to major in forestry. While on campus, he was active in the Forestry Club and the military department's trumpet and drum corps. In January 1940, Sid enrolled in Estherville Junior College in Estherville, Iowa. However, though he had discovered courses that interested him while he was in college, he decided it wasn't quite the right thing for him, and he left school to move back to Chicago. With the onset of World War II, the brothers parted, with James going to Navy Pier Great Lakes to train for the Navy Coast Guard. Sid's brother George signed on with the Army, and Sidney headed to Randolph Field in Texas to train as a pilot, entering the service on February 3rd, 1942. During his time in Texas, Sid fell in love with a woman who was a member of the USO. It's a support organization for military service members and their families. Sid made a promise to his sweetheart that when he was finished with his tour of duty, they would be married. After his training in Texas, Sidney traveled the world in the service of his country. At one time, he flew from Brazil to Morocco, resulting in a passover of the equator. Because he and the other members of his flight crew were from small towns, he had never flown over the equator. They decided they needed to remember that moment. As they passed over the strategic line, every crew member signed a dollar bill called a snorkel as a souvenir. There are no records of a flight crew signing a dollar bill as an equatorial memento, leading us to believe that Sid's crew may have been the first and only one to invent this ritual. Wonder where that dollar bill is today, huh? Oh, it is. I didn't even see that. Should have done my research better, huh? Sid was eventually stationed in England. During his service, Sidney piloted a bomber on more than 50 missions. Wow. On his missions, he was recorded in the Waterloo Daily. One of his missions was recorded in the Waterloo Daily Courier on September 1st, 1943. The report stated that on August 31st, 1943, he flew the Liberty Bell, a Marauder bomber, on a mission that bombed the huge Bethune chemical plant in northern France. On May 1944, Allied forces were preparing for the large-scale invasion of Normandy, France, codenamed Operation Overlord, or D-Day. It would take place on June 6, 1944. This marked the beginning of the liberation of France from German occupation and was the culmination of months of planning and buildup along the English Channel, with troops and supplies being amassed in anticipation of the cross-channel attack. Allied forces were actively training, assembling troops, and preparing naval and air support for the upcoming invasion of Normandy. The Allied command was finalizing details, including the designated landing beaches in Normandy and conducting bombing raids on German positions in France to disrupt their defenses, supply lines, and logistics. The German military, under Field Marshal Rommel, was fortifying the French coastline with coastal defenses, known as the Atlantic Wall, to try to repel the Allied invasion. I've already mentioned Sid's kind-hearted nature. On that day, he went missing. This kind-heartedness was the cause of his downfall. On May 28, 1944, he was supposed to be finished with his tour of duty. He was headed home to reunite with his family after being stationed in England for over a year, serving the Allied cause. But on that day, one of his Air Corps friends was feeling ill and could not make the scheduled flight. Sid decided to take that flight before heading home. It was his 60th mission. 60. On May 28, 1944, the flight took off from the U.S. Army Air Corps base in England at the RAF's Stansted Munchfleet Field, northeast of London. The assigned bombing target was a railroad bridge in Saint-Germain, northwest of central Paris, part of the Allied push to disrupt German supply lines. Sid was aboard a B-26 Bravo Marauder. During the flight, the crew drew German anti-aircraft fire. Hit by flak just before bombs away, the B-26 went into a dive with one engine on fire. The bailout alarm was immediately sounded. Despite their efforts to escape, 3 crew members, including Sidney, perished and 2 survived but were taken prisoners of war. Sid was declared missing after this encounter and was declared dead 6 months later. The 2 prisoners of war were eventually released and made it back to the United States after the war ended. Sidney's promise to his USO lady love was not to be fulfilled. After his passing, Sidney Peterson was honored with numerous medals and awards, including the prestigious Distinguished Flying Cross, the Air Medal with a notable 10 oak leaf clusters, and a Purple Heart. Distinguished Flying Cross is awarded for heroism or extraordinary achievement during aerial flight. The Air Medal is awarded to U.S. personnel for meritorious achievements while participating in aerial flight. The oak leaf cluster decoration that is added to a medal indicates that the service member has received that medal more than once. Given these recognitions, it's obvious that Sidney served with bravery and distinction. In Sid's hometown of Ringsted, Iowa, his legacy lives on every Memorial Day, along with those of the other hometown boys who gave their lives in service. The town commissions a pilot to fly the caskets, flags of Ringstead's deceased service members, and a stirring airborne tribute of thanks. Here today to honor Sidney and his great nephew Michael Stark and his wife Cheryl Sloan. Many items, to include a dollar bill, for the display table were sent from Sidney's niece, Nancy Peterson. Would all those who are here today for Sidney Peterson please rise to be recognized?
Max Harvey Collins. In the small town of Nevada, Iowa, Harvey and Leota Collins marked the new year of 1929 with the birth of his son on January 26th. Max Harvey Collins was the first of 3 boys born into the Collins family. Richard arrived 2 years later, and when Max and Richard were 10 and 8 years old, Robert was born. Harvey and Leota Collins raised the boys in rural Story County on a farm. The Collins family sold milk and eggs, and they also farmed 100 acres east of Nevada. They grew corn, soybeans, and oats. The boys all learned to weld at a young age so they could help fix the farm equipment. A favorite fun activity on the farm involved zip line type ride Harvey built for the boys over a creek. The boys would climb up a platform, grab the rope, and sit on a stuffed grain sack seat and zip across the creek and back again. It took perfect timing to get all the way back to the other side of the water without getting wet. Max always wanted to fly, and he was fascinated with airplanes. One time, Max ordered a particularly complex balsa wood model airplane kit through the Sears catalog. Who remembers those? Robert remembers Max spending days reading the instructions, cutting the pieces to exactly the right length, and carefully gluing the many intricate pieces together. Once the plane was built, Max climbed on top of the family's grain silo and launched the model, hoping for a smooth flight. Unfortunately, the model plane crashed to the ground and broke into a million pieces. Max attended Hickory Grove Country School through 8th grade before attending Nevada High School, graduating in 1947. He then enrolled at Iowa State College of Agriculture and Mechanical Arts to study aeronautical engineering, which was a relatively new department at the time. The Board of Regents approved the Department of Aeronautical Engineering in 1941. After completing 2 years at Iowa State, Max enlisted in the United States Air Force. By enlisting, he was able to select a branch of service rather than be called into active duty through the draft. Max's ambition was to become a pilot. However, the Air Force didn't have any openings for pilots at that time. His second choice was photography, which became his first military assignment. Max attended and graduated from the School of Photography at Lowry Air Base in Denver, Colorado. He stood second in his class, and he went on to receive further training at O'Hare Air Base in Park Ridge, Illinois. Max was called into cadet officer training in September 1951. He was sent to Greenville, Mississippi to begin his flight education while in Mississippi. He learned to fly the T-6 trainer and the T-28 trainer planes. He thoroughly enjoyed flying. He was then sent to Air Force Base in Laredo, Texas. There he was the first student pilot in his class to solo with the T-33 jet training plane. His immediate family was at his graduation when he received his silver pilot wings and was commissioned second lieutenant with distinguished honors. After his graduation, Max was sent to Nellis Air Force Base in Las Vegas for air-to-air combat training for 3 months. Then before he started flying missions in Korea, Max underwent a special 2-week survival training program in Japan. He was the only soldier in his training group to successfully remain hidden throughout the training exercise. In Korea, Max was stationed at Kimpo 13 in Suwon. While there, he successfully completed 3 separate missions in his F-Sabre fighter jet. In between missions, Max enjoyed playing cards with other service members, handing out candy to local children, and taking pictures to send back home to his family. Max's commanding colonel described him as a very hardworking and perfectionist. He was quite handy with tools, and he took great pride in improving his and his roommates' quarters. On May 4th, 1953, Max was attempting his 4th combat mission when his plane crashed during takeoff, and he was killed. His death came less than 3 months before an armistice ended the conflict. Second Lieutenant Max Harvey Collins was 24 years old at the time of his crash and is remembered by his family as a kind-hearted and caring soul. After his passing, Collins was awarded the Korean Service Medal with 2 Bronze Stars, the United Nations and National Defense Service Medals, the Korean Presidential Unit Citation, and the Republic of Korea War Service Medal. After Max's death, the war in Korea continued for 3 months. With the battle lines remaining relatively stable, the conflict had become a stalemate. Prior to the end of the Truman administration in 1953, plans to reunite the North and South Korea were abandoned, and limited goals were pursued to avoid the escalation of conflict into a third world war involving China and the Soviet Union. Acting on a campaign pledge, incoming President-elect Dwight D. Eisenhower went to Korea in December 1952. After visiting the troops, their commanders, and South Korean leaders, and receiving briefs on the military situation in Korea, Eisenhower concluded, "We could not stand forever on a static front and continue to accept casualties without any visible results. Small attacks on small hills will not end this war." President Eisenhower sought an end to the hostilities in Korea through a combination of diplomacy and military muscle flexing. On January 27, 1953, 7 months after President Eisenhower's inauguration as the 34th President of the United States, an armistice was signed, ending organized conflict operations and leaving the Korean Peninsula divided at the 30th parallel, much as it had been since the close of the World War II. The United Nations actions prevented North Korea from imposing its communist rule on South Korea, and the United States actions in Korea demonstrated America's willingness to combat aggression and strengthen President Eisenhower's hand in Europe as he sought to organize European military defense under the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO. The Republic of South Korea continues to be a strong democratic ally in the world affairs today, and its people and all Americans are forever grateful to Max Collins and all those who gave their life defending its freedoms. Here today to honor Max is his brother Robert from Colo, along with Robert's daughters Patricia, Harms, and Jill Weber, and other family members in attendance. Would all of you here today please rise and be recognized?
My name is Lieutenant Colonel Dan Devine. I'm a 1987 graduate of Iowa State University. I was, as you can tell, not in the Air Force or Army, I was in the Marine Corps, and they still invite me here anyway, so I appreciate that. My connection to Iowa State as a graduate of both, the college or the university and then also ROTC, which we're going to find out has a few things in common with James Wayne Herrick Jr. In the 1940s, the population near the small town of Panora featured a noteworthy family, James and Isla Herrick and their 9 lively children, 8 boys and 1 greatly outnumbered girl. When James and Isla's second child was born on October 28, 1944, he was named James Jr. for his father. Though it was not planned, 3 of the 8 boys were actually born in October. While living on the farm, the only school option in the late 1940s was a one-room schoolhouse. Jim and his siblings would walk 2 miles to and from school every day. One day on the walk home, his siblings noticed that Jim was dragging behind. This was not normal, as Jim was a lively, energetic 7-year-old. He was taken to the doctor with the hope that the issue would resolve itself. But instead, the family left the doctor's office with a diagnosis of polio. From that moment on, things changed dramatically for Jim and his Forrest family. He spent several months in the Children's Hospital down in Des Moines. The family changed their plans to support him and bring him back to health. Jim's polio diagnosis came in 1952, which was the worst outbreak of polio in the history of the United States. At the time, only 1 in 10 fully paralyzed children survived the polio diagnosis. And it was even far more rare for a child to regain full body movement. It is unclear what actually caused Jim to recover. Regardless, the Herrick family had their prayers answered when one day, about a year later, the doctors declared that polio was no longer in their child's system and that he was getting better. Though doctors gave Jim a clean bill of health, he still had hard work ahead of him. To return his muscles to their original state, he had to continue physical therapy outside of the hospital. Jim's mother was the most concerned at the time and filled sandbags. She must have had some Marine Corps blood in her, or Army blood there, filling sandbags. Filled sandbags for him to use as weights for his workouts. Eventually, after years of hard work, his body regained full mobility and his original muscular strength returned. After his recovery, he returned to school. When he was in 3rd grade, his family moved directly into Panora. Later, as a high school student there, he was active in band, chorus, glee club, yearbook, the school paper, and, amazing for a polio survivor, basketball and track. He became an Eagle Scout and graduated from Panora High School. Then he decided to attend Iowa State University for a degree in electrical engineering. 2 years after he began his program, he discovered a passion for helping animals and changed his degree to animal husbandry. While at Iowa State, Jim also enrolled in the ROTC program. Greatly influenced by 2 of his younger brothers, he hoped to join the Air Force after graduation. Jim was especially close to 2 of these brothers, Paul and Gary, who were the closest to him in age. The family referred to them as the 3 Musketeers. Paul and Gary were the ones who urged Jim to join the Air Force just as they had. 2 other brothers, Jeremy and Don, also decided to follow in the footsteps of the 3 Musketeers and join the Air Force when they were old enough. When he graduated from Iowa State in May of 1967, Jim had completed his bachelor's degree and also had earned him the commissioning as a second lieutenant in the Air Force. In the fall of 1967, Jim was sent to Texas for jet pilot training. While he was there, he fell in love. He met a woman named Penny who absolutely stole his heart. He gave her a promise ring in lieu of an engagement ring that he intended to give to her upon his return from his tour of duty. Jim graduated from flight school high enough up to have his choice of assignments, so he chose to fly the Douglas Skyraider. In May of 1969, after further training in Florida and Washington, he was sent to Thailand to begin service. Jim spent much of his time in Thailand on edge. It was difficult to know who to trust. The enemy could pretend to be friendly, but then when you turned your back, they would attack. For many years prior to Jim's arrival in Southeast Asia, countries in that region experienced unrest and conflict driven by the attempts to throw off colonialism and competing governmental ideologies. An attempt at peace called the Geneva Accords was signed in 1954. Jim would have been just 10 years old. The Accords established two countries, North and South Korea, divided by the 17th parallel. The North was governed by a communist regime, the South by a fragile democratic state. On the other side of the world, fears about a one-by-one communist takeover of countries of Southeast Asia, known as the domino effect, caused the United States to take great interest in defending South Vietnam. Despite the Geneva Accords, unrest continued and plagued South Vietnam, and no stable government was established. In 1964, a U.S. ship was attacked by North Vietnam in the Gulf of Tonkin, which prompted Congress to pass the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, authorizing the president to take all necessary measures, including the use of armed forces, against the aggressors in the conflict. Thus began the U.S. involvement that would have a direct impact on the life of Lieutenant Jim Herrick. Jim was a member of the 602nd Special Operations Squadron based at Nakhon Phanom Royal Air Force Base in Thailand. During his time in Thailand, Jim flew many missions, including Sandy missions, which were missions to rescue endangered servicemen. On October 27, 1969, he was the pilot of a Douglas Skyraider on a secret reconnaissance mission in Laos near the Vietnam border. He was accompanied by a second plane with that pilot, the designated lead. The flight plan was to survey a region in Laos called the Bird's Nest. This region was difficult to navigate as it was in a canyon. The only way pilots were successfully able to get down into the canyon was to circle like a bird, hence it became known as the Bird's Nest. The lead pilot performed a descending circle into the area, followed by Herrick. As the two conducted the reconnaissance of the area, the weather turned worse and clouds overhead started to come in. The lead pilot made circling maneuvers to safely ascend out of the area and instructed Jim to do so also. Jim acknowledged this transmission, but shortly afterwards, the flight leader lost radio contact with him. Once above the clouds, the lead pilot could not place eyes on Jim's plane. The lead pilot again descended down into the canyon and began to search for Jim. But when his fuel ran low, he had to call off the search and was forced to leave the area. Jim's aircraft failed to return to base. No parachute was observed. No rescue beacon signals were received. 3 days later, another pilot on a mission in the same area reported seeing aircraft wreckage in a burned area at the approximate last known position of First Lieutenant Herrick's aircraft. That wreckage had not been there 5 days earlier. Jim was never seen again, and it was never confirmed whether the plane was shot down, experienced mechanical difficulties, or misjudged the canyon's wall. The day of his loss was 1 day before his 25th birthday and 1 week before he was to return home on leave. Halfway around the world, the very day Jim disappeared, his mother uncharacteristically blacked out for a moment. She instinctively knew that something was seriously wrong with Jim before anyone could confirm her beliefs in this terrible phenomenon. and Jim's true love, Penny, was never to receive the engagement ring Jim had promised her. He was declared missing, and no evidence of his survival nor of his death has ever been discovered, to including up through today. After his passing, Jim Herrick was awarded the Purple Heart, Distinguished Flying Cross, and the Air Medal for his bravery and devotion to our country and to the cause of South Vietnam. He was promoted to the rank of captain during the period he was maintained as missing in action. On November 21st, 1977, over 8 years later, he was declared killed in action. Jim's family remembers him as a handsome, quiet young man with a heart full of love for animals. They say that given the chance, he would have done anything for anyone. James Wayne Herrick Jr. is memorialized at the Courts of the Missing at the National Memorial Cemetery of the Pacific in Honolulu, and his name is inscribed on the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C. Today, we are pleased to recognize some of the family members. We have, amongst many family members, one nephew named after him, 3 brothers, and the one toughie of the entire family, the one girl. Would you please stand to be recognized?
Thank you to all of our readers who shared these stories. Let's remember our honorees with a moment of silence. We will now close our ceremony with the final reading of names. Sydney Wilson Peterson, Max Harvey Collins, James Wayne Herrick, Jr. If able, please rise for the playing of taps and the retiring of the colors. You may be seated. Since the inception of the Gold Star Hall ceremony in 2002, the role of the Memorial Union Director in partnership with the Military Affiliated Students Center has been to ensure the legacy of the Memorial Union's purpose and to ensure our veterans and their families know that we will always remember them for their service and sacrifice. I wish to express my heartfelt thanks to all members of our military family for everything they contend with day in and day out, including being away from their families at times, being far away from their homeland on deployments, the mental health issues they often face, and for their bravery in fighting for their country. I appreciate this ceremony, and this building stands as a testament that military service means something to us here at Iowa State. To those in the Iowa State community who have served our country, this ceremony is for you and the freedom you provide for all of us. I would like to thank the family members and the friends of our honorees today. Thank you for sharing details of their lives with us and for allowing us to tell their shared stories today. We honor you for your sacrifice as well. And finally, I'd like to thank the Gold Star Hall Committee for their work to help plan this ceremony. It's quite a bit of work to find and review names and submissions and work together with families to put all the details together. So I'd like to thank all of the committee members who are listed on the presentation slide. And a special thanks to Chris Auks, our Gold Star Hall research assistant, for their many hours of hard work and writing which brought our honorees' stories to life. Guests are invited to view the names of our honorees in the Gold Star Hall and displays around the honorees, or about the honorees in the Oak Room behind you. And join us for a small reception back here in the Great Hall. Have a great evening, and thank you all for coming.